Redefine it the best I can. A leitmotif is any phrase of music which takes on a connection with extra musical aspects. Usually with characters, with situations, with objects, with ideas, with something in the drama. It's music that takes on a fixed, to some extent, fixed dramatic sense. Wagner never used the term leitmotif himself, but it was coined in Wagner's lifetime by Hans von Wolzogen, someone whom Wagner held in utter contempt, by the way, but not because of the term leitmotif, because he was one of these sycophantic, noble people that Cosima loved to have around, and that Wagner had to put up with, although he secretly didn't respect him. Nevertheless, the term is stuck. Leit in German means light, it means to lead, and as in a ladder, we have that word in English from the same root, and motif just means idea, motive. So it's a ladder between the music and the drama. That's the sense of the term. One of the real standard questions that I've been asked far more times than I can count is, how many leitmotifs are there in the Ring? And of course, this is in a way an idiotic question, but in a way a very good question. Good questions are good because in their answer, many very significant and important subsubjects come to the fore. The answer to this question is that it depends upon how you define a leitmotif, and it depends upon how you choose to look at them. There are hundreds and hundreds, probably 300 or 400 musical phrases which I could identify with something in the story, which come back at least once. So, for that answer, in the most general sense of the term, there are hundreds of leitmotifs in the Ring. If you are trying to give the most reductive answer possible and reduce all leitmotifs back to common sources, there are probably just a few dozen. So it's a big number. I'm going to give several major limitations and provisos, sort of warnings about leitmotifs, which, as often as they get said, are nevertheless always ignored. The biggest problem with a leitmotif, and one which has been really objected to by Wagner from the start and by every serious commentator since, is that once we name something, once we say that this is Wotan's frustration motive, or this is the Rheingold motive for that matter, or this is any other motive in the Ring, a name is fixed, the motives are not. Or better, the overwhelming majority of the motives in the Ring are in constant state of change and redefinition. They retain enough of their initial meaning that we sort of recognize that initial meaning. But their value to Wagner is largely in their protean character, in their ability to change. One of the major ways in which the Ring is different, and this is a very important point, from the other mature Wagner works, is precisely in that, whereas in the Ring, the motives have much more precise dramatic definition. In Tristan, you have very, very little for Tristan, for instance, but Parsifal too. Very, very few phrases that are attached in any way, really, to specific things in the drama. In spite of the fact that people get made up names for them. It's always very funny when you look at the table of motives that they did back in the early 20th century. For Tristan, there'll be the passion, love, love's felicity, love's bliss, love's desire. You know, they're just making these things up as they go along. There's entirely arbitrary. They're different motives, and they all attach themselves in some way or another with love to them. In the Ring, there really are a lot of motives which are attached to quite specific things, or quite specific events, or quite specific feelings. At the same time, in all the other major Wagnerian works, and this goes even before the Ring, Wagner musically is mostly dealing with setting up opposing worlds. In Tannhäuser, perhaps the clearest example I could give, there is the world of the Venusberg and the world of St. Elizabeth. And these worlds are opposed musically as well as dramatically. They have very different music, and these musics oppose each other. There are, already in Tannhäuser, a few places where they overlap. But in general, Wagner keeps these worlds separate. This is true in Parsifal. This is true even to some extent in Tristan. Although Tristan, there is much more music of the world of desire than there is in the world of the outside of day. Much more night music than day music in Tristan. Nevertheless, there are these opposing worlds. In the Ring, Wagner also has worlds, more than two. But much of what happens in the ring is that the worlds become combined and confused. It's the amalgamation of the worlds, and in some cases, you could say the conflict between the worlds, which are metaphorically musical worlds, types of music, which become resolved, or don't become resolved, as the case may be. But it is this intersection between these worlds that the ring is about. So it's just different. Part of what it's different because the motifs are more dramatically precise, or many of them are, and because the ring is so huge. The very scope of the ring allows this. Is that idea clear? That instead of having oppositions, that remain in opposition musically, music which is consonant, clear, at peace with itself, and music which is dissonant, let's say, which is music which is highly tense and not at peace with itself. Instead of these worlds remaining different, they very often become confused and even merged. So the first problem of motifs in the ring is that once you put a name on a motive, it becomes fixed, and the whole idea of many of the motives is they're not fixed. Another problem is really a problem of semantics. When you start talking about the music of the ring, we start talking this sort of arcane language, you say. You know, that place when the locomotive becomes transformed into the murder motive, and in other words, you speak this funny language of motive names, whereas normally musicians would say, you know, when the second theme is developed into combination with the codec. In other words, it's supplanted a musicological language with a kind of an artificial motive-based language. This probably bothers musicians more than it bothers anybody else, but it makes the ring somehow seem like some very special case, not like the rest of the world of music. And of course it is a special case, but it is like the rest of the world of music. It does attach itself to the rest of the music. And the other problem, and this is what I basically addressed last night, is if we emphasize motives only, we forget about just what the basic function of music is in the ring. We don't pay attention to the music as a mirror for the dramatic situation, as a mirror for the emotional inner life of the characters, as a Greek chorus commenting on the action, all these other things that the music does. It uses motifs as a means, but the music, the purpose is for the music to have this quality. Another problem with the names of motives and the fact that they become so stable is that it undercuts one of Wagner's two basic goals, which I stated last night, which I'll repeat now. One, of course, is to write music which is completely dramatic in nature. Well, if all of the music, theoretically all of the music of the ring is motivic, is related somehow to the action, that certainly makes it dramatic. So leitmotifs guarantee the dramatic quality of the music. But the other goal that Wagner had was to write music which had the power of Beethoven. In other words, this incredible power of constant development, using a small amount of material to create a very large tapestry of sound where all the elements are together. The image that artists have used for this kind of process since the Middle Ages. The artist is a demigod, working like in the 19th century, they were really taken that way. And the artist's creation is like God's creation. If you take a tree, every bit of that tree, whether it's a piece of leaf, or a piece of bark, or a piece of root, or a piece of sap, if you analyze the cells, they all will show not only what kind of tree it is, but that it is that individual tree. And that kind of unity is exactly the unity that artists from the Middle Ages, especially from the Renaissance, were seeking to have, musicians among them. And Wagner in the Ring is trying to create a work unlike what he felt operas had become, where it was just haphazard numbers, where if you didn't like this tragic aria, you would just substitute another tragic aria from another work. He wanted something which was so unified that every cell, every minute, would be related to every other minute. When Wagner finished the composition of Rheingold, he wrote his friend Rückel, who had gotten arrested in the Dresden Revolution and was in jail for 10 years, which is probably what Wagner would have, something like that, would have gotten as a sentence. And he says, with great pride, he said, I have finished the prologue to my great work, and I note with particular satisfaction that I can say that every measure is related to some other through combined themes. It's kind of the term he uses. So in other words, he's trying to write a work of great organic unity. There are two dangers besides these that deal with when we deal with motives. But there is, however, a reason why, nevertheless, I personally, and I think most of us, still talk about the Valhalla motive and the sword motive and the fate motive, etc. Even though in some cases we think the names are not only limitations, but even inaccurate. The fate motive, for instance, is one where I personally have no idea where it got that name, and it never felt particularly that the name makes very much sense. But we can talk about that separately. But it is so convenient, the overwhelming convenience. See, if I talk to anybody, many of you in this room, if I just say Wotan's frustration motive, you know exactly what I'm talking about, at least basically. If I say Valhalla motive, practically everybody in this room knows what I'm talking about. It's just so much more convenient in a work which is so complex, so long, so without sort of the natural divisions. I can't say, if I were talking about a Beethoven symphony, I could say the second theme of the second movement, or the final theme, the new theme he introduces in the coda of the first movement. And anybody with a musical background would know immediately what I'm talking about. I can't do that in the ring. But I can't even do what I would do in an opera. And this is a very important part. Let's say I'm talking about Lucia di Lammermoor or something. I could say, that wonderful theme in the sextet in the second act. Or that wonderful theme that's in that beautiful melody in Tu che addio leale spiegasti, this aria. These are separate places, and you know what I'm talking about if you know Lucia di Lammermoor. You can't do that in the ring either. I can't say, you can occasionally say, you can say, that theme we hear when the curtain rises at the beginning of scene 2 of Valkyrie, of Rheingold. There is somebody who does that, a very important and great Wagner scholar, Robert Bailey, who's I think probably spoken for you guys in Washington, hasn't he? Okay, but Robert Bailey is one of the most important Wagner scholars and head of musicology at NYU and teaches at Juilliard and is probably, from a musical standpoint, the biggest authority on Wagner in the United States, other than I. Well, he's a musicologist, I'm a pianist, so we come from different worlds. Mr. Bailey, Professor Bailey, refuses ever to mention a Leitmotif by name. So he really is forced to say, the theme that we hear the first time that Mima says, the third time that he mentions this, and see, it's just so inconvenient. So the overwhelming convenience of Leitmotif names leads me and most of us, even Boulez and people very sophisticated like that, to use them still. Now going back now, so let's accept Leitmotifs as these fragments that stand for things in the music, and accept the idea that the names are, in most cases, misrepresentations because the name stays the same where the motive is in constant change. And the motive changes in more ways than one. That's worth mentioning. One way the motive changes is that it literally changes. In other words, it sounds different. It keeps enough that we recognize it, but it sounds different. But another way it changes is that because it's in new contexts, used in new circumstances, it takes on new meanings. An example, for instance, from last night that I mentioned, the spear motive, which we'll get in a second, one of the basic motives of the ring, this downward scale, occurs all through the first act of Götterdämmerung, and it's not disguised in the slightest. It is exactly the same as it was in Rheingold, as it is at the end of Valkyrie when Wotan takes the spear and whacks it on the ground and calls Loga for fire. I mean, it's not changed a bit. But there is no hint of Wotan or Wotan's spear or any of the other physical elements with it. In other words, the context is entirely different. And it makes us think about what this means both to the symbol itself and to the circumstance we're in. So it can change musically, but can also change in context. When people have studied Leitmotifs in the past, there have been two basic traps to fall into. I would say one is the non-musician's trap, and the other, which I'm much more likely to fall into, is the musician's trap. The non-musician's trap is to, instead of listening to the ring and getting involved in its story and getting involved in its wonderful music, is to start hunting for Leitmotifs. Oh gosh, I didn't ever notice it. There's this, and you go through the whole score and you start hunting. And of course, then we have these additions which very supposedly helpfully show us. So they'll say, motive 53, motive 68, motive 17, and then you look at the back of the book and the index and you see that motive 68 is Wotan's frustration, and motive 16 is Siegfried's desire for travel, or et cetera, et cetera. That is, by the way, in many guides, a specific motive. And of course, the problem with this is that it becomes a silly game. It has very little to do with the emotional experience or the musical experience of what the ring is about. So constantly hunting for motives is a danger. On the other hand, of course, if we don't hear the associations, if we're not constantly be reminded of other music, then Wagner's whole premise has failed. So the whole premise of The Ring is that the music will always be dramatic and always be leading us from one place to another place. Don't forget that all music form is about time and connections in time. So if we don't constantly recognize the music and don't constantly refer it to times that we've already heard it and times we are going to hear it, then the whole premise of the music in The Ring fails. You cannot or should not listen to the music in The Ring just as some kind of lovely flood of sound. One of the advantages of Rheingold, in a way, is that he doesn't give us a chance to. As Simon very correctly said, the overwhelming amount of Rheingold is not very pretty music. It doesn't have any love music or any sustained love music. It doesn't have any long, except for long, sustained melodic passages. He avoids all that. So you're forced into listening to the music strictly for its dramatic material, or almost strictly for its dramatic material. So the one trap is to go on the constant treasure hunt for leitmotifs. That's the typical non-musician's trap. That was a trap that all the early commentators made with their big tables. And of course, the problem is that they missed so many. They both misidentified very many. I'll give a very famous example in a second. But they also just miss a lot. They don't, because they're not musicians. They don't hear this. They didn't know it was there. They never noticed. Sometimes things they don't notice are extraordinary, astounding, but still that's the way it is. But also because it's just a silly approach. It's a very reductive approach, and one that actually gets in the way, I think, of appreciating the music. The musician's trap, however, is to try to lump the motives together. There's actually a very long German term for this, but the magic of relationships is basically a translation of the term. To look so much, I'm going to fall into this immediately today, the magic of looking for ways in which the motives relate to each other. And instead of saying, gosh, there are 54 motives that we hear for the first time in the first and second act of Valkyria, which there probably are, if you really use the term leitmotif in the most general way, you could say, well, of those 54, 51 of them are actually just new forms of motives we've already heard from Rheingold, and of those there are only 4. So instead of having 54 motives, you have 4 motives, and many, many different kind of manifestations of these motives. The problem with this approach is that it ultimately it eliminates the dramatic meaning of the specificity of the motives, but it also it becomes, or it risks becoming a reductio ad absurdum. In other words, if you reduce everything down to a scale, or to a chord, or to a sequence of 3 chords, then it doesn't really mean anything anymore. What's the point? It doesn't. Its meaning is strictly theoretical, not real. So that is a real danger. I will say this, though, in defense of this trap. Wagner very purposely, and this we'll start with right now, in The Ring, chose to use as his basic motives, and these he did call by name. He called them plastic Urmotiven, basic motives. Not just that stand for the basic ideas in The Ring, the basic dramatic, also conceptual ideas in The Ring. He chose purposely the most basic, fundamental building blocks of musical vocabulary, the simplest things. The value of these things is that they are enormously protean. Their possibility for change is almost limitless. So if I start reducing everything down to scales, the fact is that Wagner has used one of his building blocks, which is a scale. If I start reducing everything down to a major or minor chord, what we call a diatonic chord. Diatonic simply means there are no elements in the chord which clash with the chord. It is a chord completely at rest. It is completely, entirely stable. If Wagner builds a lot of his material on that, he does so precisely because it is so basic. So the tendency to try to find these common grounds, as this talk is about, you have your sheet on motive families, that's what I'm talking about now, is basically doing this, sort of reducing the number of motives into sort of family groups. There's another advantage to this, which sometimes outweighs its dangers, but I'm very aware of the danger. It becomes a game in its own way, sort of a musicological game, similar to the game that the non-musicians like Volkswagen and Lavignac and these other commentators do. they go hunting for leitmotifs. I'm looking for ways to make them, find the ways they were all the same. But another advantage is very often it becomes very revealing about the dramatic meaning of them. I'll give you the most simple example. We just heard again from Simon, and I played yesterday, and I'll play again, how we hear that the theme that we associate with Valhalla grows directly out of Wagner has the one version to the other. Now this is a musical tie, but more than anything else, it is a very important dramatic tie. The fact that we tie these things together also shows us that in spite of the glory and grandeur of Valhalla's theme, it has in it the same seeds, as it were, of the ring, which is associated with love-destroying greed, with the curse of love and unmitigated greed. Before I start, I'm going to, we can argue about this tonight, but I'm going to refute one point that, not refute, dispute, that's the word, one point that Simon made, talking about the similarities between Alberich and Wotan, which of course are very important and very significant, very deep. There is one, however, enormous difference, and it can be summed up in one event, event that you mentioned. Erda convinces Wotan to give up the ring. Neither Erda nor anyone else, under any possible circumstance, would ever have convinced Alberich willingly to give up the ring. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay.
Listen to me this often.
Okay. Good. Excellent. That's the great thing, by the way, of having we constantly are sort of kicking each other into our next time. It's great. And I love that. Okay. So let's talk now simply about the motive families, how the music of the ring is organized. Okay, and we're just going to talk about the various families of motives of the ring and what they sound like, and then maybe what they mean. So, we have part A. These are all motives that deal with nature. This in itself, as we'll see, is going to become very important because some of the themes that are nature themes are things that we perhaps at first blush would not think of being things that belong to nature. At the very beginning of the ring, as you know, we hear this. This long established major chord, which finally becomes, and then becomes associated with the Rhine as the water starts going. I would say that actually the Rhine itself, the Rhine part of it, as a physical object, the Rhine as something physical, as a river, is really contained in that movement, and that, which is the same basic music, it's just all flowing. But this outline is the sort of basic nature motive in the ring. So, for instance, when Erda first appears on the scene, we have this very dramatic stop. I mean, things have really come to a head, and she comes on and we hear her. Of course, immediately our guidebooks tell us this is the Erda motive, this is the Rhine motive, that's the Erda motive. Of course, on the very next page, during Erda's interlude, I can do it by memory, but if it's in the book, since I'm not doing it in the book. Yes, there is, it takes time. We have Erda's talking about, actually it's just, that's it. So we would say, if we were going to be blind and literal, we'd say, gosh, so Erda's now the Rhine, because it's the major, and the major was the Rhine, and the minor was Erda, which is what the guidebooks would basically lead us to say. But of course, this is balderdash. It's just nature. She comes in minor because there's something solemn, and minor keys feel solemn and stern, and perhaps tinged with tragedy to us, whereas major keys seem happy and bright to us. This is just part of our musical conscience. It's been around for centuries and centuries. Wagner's using this. But Erda, this theme is as much associated with Erda as this theme. Minor or major. We think of Erda with the minor one because that's what we hear the first time she comes on stage. But she is a force of nature. And that theme is, in both forms, major and minor, a theme which definitely defines nature, and the simple arpeggios. But these simple arpeggios don't have to necessarily be so simple. Right off the bat, the very first music, the whole prelude of Rheingold is just based on 135 measures. We hear nothing but, if anybody needs to know what a measure is, just raise your hand and I'll tell you. 130, and I didn't mean that in any sarcastic way. That's quite serious. There's no reason why you should know what a measure is if you haven't studied music. After 135 measures of just that, we finally hear something different, which is the Song of the Rheingold. In this, there's one new note, which is that one. It's still basically just an arpeggio. That's the term I use there. An arpeggio is just if you take a chord and instead of playing it as chords, what you play it as, or sort of spread out. It's an arpeggio. An arpeggio is a spread out chord. So this is basically an arpeggio which has been turned into a melody. Obviously, if I just play this, it's not very interesting melodically. But if I play this, it's a very beautiful melody. But it's still basically just a chord, an arpeggio turned into a melody. Now, this melody we associate obviously with the Rheingold. I think this is a very good example of how tricky these names are. Because, yes, we associate it with the Rheingold very much, but we only hear it, for instance, when the Rheinmaidens come back at the end of Rheingold, we don't hear it. And during the entire Rheinmaiden scene in Götterdämmerung, we never hear this motive, ever. We hear it again at the very end of the ring. Now, so obviously, this is, because it's a arpeggio, and a diatonic arpeggio, in other words, a single key arpeggio without any harmonic complexity or tension whatsoever, it's associated with nature. It is the motive of the Rheinmaidens as they exist before the rape of the Rheingold, the theft of the Rheingold. It's the Rheinmaidens as this picture of a certain natural world, as they belong in the natural world. When they get it back, or one time, and the only other time we hear it is when Alberic refers to their possibly getting it back. In the second act of Götterdämmerung, we hear it in this form, and Alberic is telling Hagen, the very worst thing that could ever happen would be if the Rhine daughters get the gold back, because no one would ever get it away from them again a second time. And then we hear that, because it's referring to them as they existed before. And of course, at the end of Götterdämmerung, we hear it again because they get it back. So, you know, it refers to a very specific quality about the Rheinmaidens. The Rheinmaidens as manifestations of this natural world. This melody, anybody recognize that if I played with that rhythm? Anybody know what that is? Yes, it's the end of Valkyries. Brunhilde's, we always call that the sleep motive. In every guidebook I've ever seen, that's the sleep motive, right? That's Brunhilde's sleep. We hear it all the time at the end of, we hear it a few other times too, but we hear it, it's the same music. It's just the rhythm is different, the context is different. But now, once again, this is a very interesting connection because, of course, it makes one think a little bit about what is the symbolism of the sleeping Brunhilde, what is the symbolism of what Brunhilde actually comes to mean, at least that aspect of Brunhilde to Siegfried when he finds her. That's actually an arpeggio right there. Thank you, that's perfectly apropos. So the sleeping Brunhilde, the sleeping Brunhilde is another theme which is, for all intents and purposes, identical to the Rheinmaidens in nature, and again, which is just basically a melodic version of this arpeggio. It's certainly different. It's different enough that everyone in this room hears the difference between and. But as a musician, it's the same music. And that's very significant. It's dramatically significant. I don't know what it means exactly, or I prefer not to say. But that doesn't matter. The connection is made. We make a subliminal connection. Here's another theme. The one note's been changed, but it's a note that's already there. Anybody know what that is? The Forspur. song of the forest bird, what the forest bird will sing. Over. So once again, it's a voice of nature, and it forces us to compare the forest bird to the sleeping Brunhilde, and especially to the Rhine maidens, and back to the original rhyme. So these are examples where this motive family stuff actually really makes a lot of sense. Now, there is another and much more important example. I'm still on A2, melodically altered arpeggios. It's been altered because we've added one note instead of it's. Now, if we add one more note, sort of just in the middle of that, we get this. Which, of course, we heard for the first time in that form, very prominently, in Loga's monologue, talking about the fact that no one in the world wants to give up love. It's sort of a paean to love in the natural world. It's associated with Freya, but in most, we'd all call that the Freya motive. But that's in a way, a very silly name if we think of Freya as a person. Because we hear that motive in Götterdämmerung Act 1. When for instance, we hear it all over the place, when Hagen says just to have to turn to one right here. Hagen is telling them, well, actually Gudrun is saying, how could I ever possibly attract Siegfried? And then he's going to say, because of this potion I'm going to give you, we hear. That's this Freya motive. Why having a Freya? What does Freya have to do with this? Well, Freya as this kind of love, and natural love and attraction between people. And, you know, when Siegfried is lying under the tree, and we're going to start hearing the forest murmurs, we have the very longest extension, actually, of we hear an entire recap, as it were, of what Logas said, except that now Siegfried's lying under a tree, so you can hear the birds sing. Wagner is making a very important dramatic point, that in a way, Siegfried's peace and idyllic happiness lying in the forest, listening to the birds, is a mirror of what Freya represents to the world. And a mirror also of what the Rhine maidens represent, at least in their natural state. So all these things are very, very symbolically as well as musically linked.
Jeffrey?
Yes?
I don't understand something. I don't hear the Freya theme in the love theme.
Okay, you mean, I'm going to get to the love thing in a second. Great question.
Okay.
You mean this thing, you hear that, right?
I hear that's the Freya theme.
That's the Freya thing.
But I don't hear that in the love theme, which is descending.
Right, they're two separate things.
Oh, they're not related?
They are related, but I don't think that relationship is I'm going to deal with them as two separate things. The problem, we'll get to that in a second, but since you've asked it, this is one of the problems that happen with misidentifications. Probably even identifying, we first hear it, by the way, in Rheingold, is when she's coming on stage running away from the giants we hear. That's the part that's the same as, although now it's very fast and in a minor key because she's running away and in great danger. And then we have this, which is very much attached to her, also attached to Freya, but it's a separate musical thing. It is related in a way. It's related in a more sort of complex way that it might be better for me not to get into. But from a symbolic standpoint, it's very closely related. But from a musical standpoint, there are two parts. The mistake they made, all the early commentators, is they divided the symbolism up. They called the first part Freya, and they called the second part flight. And if the second part is flight, just flight, then you fall into a very, very bad trap. And I'll talk about that when I get to the love cell. Because that descending pattern is the basic love motive in the ring, or the basic love motive of a certain kind of love in the ring. And sort of love in nature, sexual love, etc. So it is attached to Freya, very much so, in symbolism. But these are just two musical aspects of Freya. Yeah, I think that's the easiest way. Two musical aspects of Freya which happen also to be related. They're related through, if I say appoggiatura, you understand what I mean?
No.
Okay, so then, and nobody wants to hear me talk about appoggiaturas, so I won't. Okay. Next we have A3. We're still under nature, diatonic harmonies, rhythmically dynamic diatonic figures. Now a chord, after all, is, we heard it first. Any key we want, it's the plain chord, totally at rest. So far we've talked about these things in arpeggios, where they're flowing, where they're spread out. What if instead of having flowing, we define the chord and make it sort of precise, and we give it the notes are the same, but we give it definition because of the rhythm. The rhythm has dynamism, has life to it. What if, for instance, we have this rhythm? It's just a chord, right? But we recognize that motive because of its rhythm. Of course, it's the Rheingold. We separate it from another motive, which is also diatonic, although it happens to be in the minor key, which is also has a rhythm. That's also just a diatonic chord. Or we separate it from another motive, which also is diatonic. Wotan's great idea, the sword motive. All of these are motives which are strictly firmly grounded in this same basic chord, but now the chord is defined by its rhythm and by the sort of dynamism of its rhythm. The only thing I would say as a dramatic a point sort of to think about is to what extent all of these ideas seem to be rooted in nature. I'm not going to answer that, but it's just an interesting point to look at. But these are in the same family of motives. 4 are ones which are defined by chords, where you have, again, sort of, if I go, that would be a good example. There are not a lot of motives that do that. Here's one. Again, it's in the minor. Here it gets away from it. The last part gets away, but we don't have to hear that whole motive to identify it. If I hear by itself, I mean, again, in the guidebooks we're told this means the Welzung race. That's as good a name as any for it. It's certainly identified with something about the Welzungs. And again, it's a diaton. It's a chord based on the simple chord. Now in this chordal version, well, there is one that at first blush would seem to be, and in a way could be. It, however, as we know, is the issue was very much clouded over, made complex because of the way we first hear it. And this is a very important example because in itself, it also seems to be one of the great nature motives, the most noble, the most grand of all the nature motives in the ring. And yet, because we see it somehow grown out of a completely different kind of motive, the ring motive, which is based on a completely different concept, which we'll get to in a second, this is a perfect example of what Wagner does in the ring. Instead of separating these worlds, he typically confuses them, merges them. And the Valhalla Motive is the best example of exactly that. One more chordal motive based on the simple chord is this one. Anybody recognize that off the top of your head?
Good.
The Gibbetchungs. It's the Gibbetchungs. Okay, isn't it interesting that the Welzungs and practically the same music. The Gibbetchungs and the Welzungs have music which is almost the same. Again, I don't want to make, you don't have to define what that means, but it's interesting, the putting them together. Wagner is relating them in a funny sort of way. And then finally now I'm at A5, descriptive. Now, of that there are very many. In other words, that's just using arpeggios to describe nature. Of course, the entire, all of them. When we were hearing, that's a different motive, but in the background, we have all those runs, which are just water, the water that we hear all through the first scene of Rheingold. Also, this isn't exactly water, but it's a form of it. That's just same arpeggio, but now it's in chord form. That, of course, is the accompaniment to. So there are two different manifestations of the same idea. Anybody think of another time we hear this exact form of sort of a descriptive using this diatonic? What about the forest murmurs? If you take the forest murmurs. and make it very slow, or actually, the music that accompanies the fourth bird when she sings. It's the same music, it's just faster. It's exactly the same. Once again, Wagner is reinforcing very interestingly the fourth bird and what she sings with the Rhine maidens and what they sing. The Rhine maidens sing of the Rheingold. The fourth bird sings of love to Siegfried. But they do it with the same melody and the same accompaniment. It's just been transformed into a new context. So these are wonderful examples, really, in a way, of how these families of motives serve also to awaken us to all sorts of dramatic connections and you know, resemblances, things that keep coming back. Okay, so I'm done with A, the first big motivic family.
Jeffrey?
Yes?
In analyzing this and you're discussing this, it's fascinating to hear this and to listen to this. From your understanding of how Wagner composed, did he sit down like a craftsman and think this through, or did this just flow from his core?
I would say that everything that I've talked about so far, except possibly the connection of the Gibbetschungs to the Welsings, are things that he would be conscious of because they're just automatic. I mean, there are things which are so completely part of what musicians do that would be automatic. The other connections, and a lot of the connections that I'm going to come to later, which are less obvious, less completely clear, are the kinds of connections that he might have thought of and might not have thought of. Composers think of a lot of things, and it's part of our heritage. First thing, in Wagner's case, most directly from Haydn and Beethoven, where the idea was to take these little themes and expand them. And one advantage we have with Beethoven, for instance, not with Haydn so much, is that since Beethoven wrote sketches on the same pieces of paper he wrote his conversation books in when he went deaf, we have enormous amounts of Beethoven's early sketch work, and you can see these working outs in Beethoven. Well, Wagner, we don't have any of that material. Wagner probably just destroyed all of that stuff. So we really don't know concretely how much of this Wagner worked out. But I think that it's not entirely important how much of this is conscious on his part and how much of it is subliminal even on his part, because it's all part of the sort of the musical vocabulary. He's working within a whole musical style which he of course is evolving a great deal and changing, but which he inherited from hundreds of years of practice. And in that hundreds of years of practice, a lot of these techniques of making things sound like being related to each other have been developed. I mean, the most involved, interestingly enough, we typically think of music, old music, as being simpler than new music, and in certain ways it is. But in terms of this aspect of evolving permutations of single small fragments, the most complex music, well, some of it is in the 1950s and 60s, the Darmstadt school, stuff like Boulez and Stockhausen. But a lot of it was back in the 15th century and 16th century, 15th and then early in the 16th, then it stops, with the great Flemish polyphonists, Josquin des Prés, Ockeghem. Ockeghem goes as far as anyone ever did, where, for instance, Ockeghem wrote a mass where the entire mass in 5 voices all derives from just one phrase. And it's all worked out mathematically, where the phrase can be divided up into, what is 8 factorial? Anyway, 8 factorial number of times. And all mathematically works out. And it's unbelievable. It sounds beautiful, but it's all completely mathematics. Now, clearly, he worked that out. That's not by accident. And Bach, when he has things happen on the 123rd measure, because 123 has religious significance to Bach, or other things like, or he writes his name out backwards over periods of spans of 2, 4, 16, 32, 64 measures within a piece. And he's doing this obviously on purpose. And he does these kinds of things. Now, the problem in these cases is, as a listener, I don't think there's any value for a listener to know this, except that to know that these are composers who put a lot of mystical value into numbers and numerology. Wagner, however, as we've seen, there is a lot of value in a lot of this because it helps us understand the dramatic nature of the ring. And indeed, in a way, the justification for Wagner's technique of having the music be entirely imbued with dramatic significance comes, I think, best in this way, when we start seeing how the music is really involved with the major ideas. I find it much more significant, much more dramatically satisfying and significant to think of that the Forest Birds music and the Rhine Maiden song or the same basic music as Freya, let's say. And what that means, then think of them rigorously as three separate themes. They are separate things. We recognize them as separate entities, but they're very much the same too. And it helps me understand the ring better as well. So, but that was conscious, I feel certain. Those are no accidents. Some of these things, but what is an accident in a work of art? I guess that's kind of the question. And we don't know how much of the music. See, let me give you. I'm gonna jump ahead. And when I get to F1, I'm gonna jump to F1 just because of your question. We'll see. In F1, we hear the fact that this motive, Brunhilde and Götterdämmerung, right? We hear it in the beginning of the beautiful theme. We hear it a lot in Götterdämmerung and associated with Brunhilde. Is basically the same music as this, which we hear in the first act of Walküre and a lot in Siegfried, which is associated in some way or another with Sieglinde, but also with the Welsings in general. It's another motive that has to do with the Welsing family. Now, so just a very simple point. Did Wagner know when he wrote the first act of Walküre, when he first writes this tune, that he's going to do? We don't know. We don't know. I mean, he wrote this music 21 years later. He wrote the first act of Die Walküre in 1855. Well, not 25, not that many years later. And he wrote the first act of Götterdämmerung in 1871. So 16 years later. But we don't know what he had already thought of. We do know this. We know one thing about the relationship of the composition of music with the words. That in all of Wagner's works, except for Tristan, he did not begin the composition until after he'd written the poem. But he said that while he wrote the poem, every moment of the poem had, and I'm going to quote literally what Wagner said, a musical aroma to it. So in other words, he had sort of basic musical feelings, thoughts about the words, which he occasionally did sketch. Sometimes it's very funny to see these we don't have very many of Wagner's sketches, but sometimes we have the right music to the wrong words. In other words, different music. And sometimes the wrong opera. The words that were originally supposed to be were originally set to which is of course Tristan. Totally different situation. But the first sketch for those words has that music to it, which is kind of interesting in itself. It sometimes shows you that he's doesn't know how he's going to fit the words with the music. So, but certainly, by the time Wagner actually is really composing, not just kind of getting a certain amount of sketch material in his head, the poem is already there. The only piece in which that's not true of is Tristan. Tristan, he has quite a few letters in which he talks about Tristan and says it's only music so far. He hasn't even thought about writing the poem yet. So Tristan has a different genesis than any of Wagner's other works. It's also worth noticing, by the way, that Tristan is the last of Wagner's works to be conceived. I mean, it's by no means the last of the works he wrote. He wrote it from 1857 to 1859. But all of other Wagner works, even Parsifal, have been conceived long before 1857. Okay, so let's now go to, unless there's any more questions, to yes?
To reveal my ignorance, what do you understand by the same music?
Oh, just music that has very much common roots. It's hard to put it into verbal terms. I mean, obviously, that's a good question. That's not an ignorant question. It's different music from... No one is going to confuse those two things. I mean, you couldn't put one in the other place. But they have extremely strong... It would be like saying two brothers who look very much alike. They don't look so much alike. They're not identical twins. You're not going to confuse them. But they're very much two brothers. They very much have the same parents. How's that? That's as good of answers I can come up with.
Thought for thinking.
Thank you. Okay. Now we're at motive family B. I'm going to have to... I'm only supposed to go to 12:30, right? Okay, this is going to get fast. Motive family B, the ring family. This is a big family. There is a lot of music in this family in the ring. The ring motive, the first time we hear the ring motive, it's actually... which is really kind of pleasant. And it's all in a major key. But as we get to know the ring motive and as it's used through the ring, the ring cycle, der Ring des Nibelungen, as opposed to the ring motive. And the ring motive, when I use these things like nature motive, ring motive, sphere motive, I'm not really referring to the object so much. I'm referring to as like a title, like saying, it's an overall title of a thing. The ring stands for a single object, but also stands for a whole body of dramatic and musical material in the ring. The whole body of what, I don't know, greed and lovelessness, all sorts of things. Anyway, its sort of definitive form is, it has all sorts of characteristics, but the only characteristic I want to deal with now is its harmonic characteristic, which is based on this chord. Which is not a, whereas these other ones I've been playing were based on this chord. This one's based on this chord. I think you can all hear that they don't sound very much alike, right? This are the same. One is major, one is minor. They're both at rest. One is sad, one is happy, if you want, but they're both completely at rest. Whereas this is totally not at rest. It's clearly a chord that's we don't know where it's going. It's called a diminished. Well, that's a diminished seventh chord, which is a basic chord, and that's a diminished ninth chord because we've added one more to it. That's a ninth. The ninth, or this is just how far they are from each other. So that's a second, that's a third, that's a fourth, that's a fifth, that's a sixth, that's a seventh, that's an octave, an eighth. Say no, harmonically, and that's a ninth. It's a very sharp one. So it's diminished is just a musical term that has to do with the size of the thirds that it makes up of. But that's technical. You don't need to know that. But what you do need to know is it's very much not at rest and very ambivalent. If I play this chord, and this is a chord that we hear in Bach. It's a very standard chord. It can go all sorts of places. It can go. Sounds perfectly nice. Sounds nice. It can be a perfectly major chord as well as a minor chord. It's a very, very ambivalent chord. And the ambivalence and the tension of the chord are the chief factors about it. There is a whole family of music that grows out of the ring motive. Now, some of it is not motives. In other words, it never attaches itself to anything in particular. It's just music itself, which is based on those kind of chords. There's lots of it in the ring. But there are some real specific motives that grow out of it. For instance, what about this one? It's the same chord, it's just being spelled out long ways now. Or in a more subtle way, perhaps. But know what that is? The second part is something else. Hunding sang, Heilig ist mein Herr, heilig ist dir mein Haus. He's telling Siegmund that is the holiness of his house, that he's going to protect it for the night. Or here the harmonic connection to the ring is much clearer. Anybody know where that comes from? It's Guter Dämmerung. Right, it's around the blood brotherhood. It's when specifically they sing, I also associate with Hagen, although actually it's originally sung by Gunther and Siegfried when they're swearing blood brotherhood. It's when they say, what will happen if one breaks the brotherhood oath? It's these. When I was a kid, we called that the atonement clause, which is absurd, but that's a nice name. In other words, this is, you will pay Zuna, because they say Zuna to it. Zuna means atonement in German. You will pay the price, in other words, with your blood, if you break this oath. There's actually another instance of it, which is it's used as part of the sort of formula that unifies the scene between Mima and Wotan. It's the same notes. It comes in a great deal in that first act of Siegfried. It seems to have something to do with the rules. I call it the rules of the game. I like that name. It doesn't really matter. Right now I'm not interested in finding a name for it, or even if there should be a name for it. But they all are related to the ring. They're all sort of just spelling out the notes. The ring chord, if we just play the melodically instead of hearing it as a chord, this is what we come with. Okay, so that's the ring family. The third family, C, sphere. it's another one of the basic symbols in the ring. I mean, a scale is about as basic as it gets in music terms. It goes down. When we hear it, 95% of the time it goes down. The first time we hear it going up is the passage that we heard just now, very sort of blood-curdling passage, which evidently in the production we're going to see this afternoon is literally blood-curdling. When Albrecht has the ring wrested from his finger, or I think something more violent in this production by Wotan. For the first time it goes, comes back up. There seems to be something particularly violent about this theme when it comes up. You know, it is in the nature of scales that there are lots of scales in the ring. When we next year do Valkyria, I'm going to talk about, perhaps in one of my 2 talks, about Wotan's spear in Valkyria. Because there are 2 big things going on in Valkyria. One has to do with Wotan's spear, and the other has to do with love. And sort of the conflict between these 2 and the way they become resolved is really the heart of the action. Yes?
I don't understand why, if you have a series of notes descending, you now turn around and say it's the same thing even though it's ascending.
Well,
I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it's still a scale. A scale is a scale whether it's going up or down.
Well, then all scales should be the same.
That's right. All scales are the same in a way. All arpeggios, I just said that with arpeggios, are a way. On some level, they are all the same. I mean, that's why it's really, that's why the trap of finding these relationships is a trap. Obviously, if I start finding Wotan's spear in every single scale in the ring, it becomes pretty reductive. On the other hand, there's two answers to that question. One is that, for instance, if I play, that's something we hear quite a few times in the ring, but that happens to be from first act of Siegfried. Wotan is talking about his power. He's talking to me when he's saying, I rule the world with my spear and its holy runes. You know, that's the music we hear. It goes down and then it goes up. So but it's the same music. I mean, I think it would be kind of silly to say this is one motive and this is a different motive. But more to the point is that at that crucial moment, which I guess I should play as it really occurs, instead of just quoting what we heard, when Albrecht has the ring ripped from his finger, Wagner forces us to compare the 2. Let me just play this whole passage. This is, after all, this is a very important, it's one of the 4 big thefts. It's one of the crucial moments in the entire ring. Okay, we have. It says, Wotan is saying, Herr Denling, give me the ring. Okay. Tears it off his finger. So it goes down, and then it seems to wrestle, and then it comes up. So this is a very important place. I think it creates very strongly for us a precedent that the spear normally goes down, but there's when it's turned on itself, when it's in inversion, it means something else. Now, you're smiling at me.
I'm laughing.
Okay, inversion in music, turning something upside down, is one of the absolutely main techniques that composers have used since the 15th century. As a musician, if I say that, okay, let me give a real comment. Of course, because I'm trying to think of an example that's really easy, I'm not going to think of anything. Because the one that first came to head is the Hammerklavier, which is not something that you're likely to have just at the top of your head. But it's one of the most common things composers do is take a theme like. That's also complicated. I want something really simple. Theme from the B minor Mass of Bach. He goes. That's upside down the theme. He combines the 2 together, but this is something that composers just do that. Wagner's a composer. You know, Wagner, that's sometimes a detail that gets ignored. And as a composer, he does things that composers do. And one of the things composers do is they take their themes upside down. So this theme, which happens, strange thing, to be just a scale with a strong rhythmic thing, he also does. Not very often. It doesn't do that very often. It does it very seldom. And it seems to have some, we associate that with maybe the misuse of the spear, let's just say. Because that's what certainly is being misused here, isn't it? Is it? Please answer. Instead of smiling at me, why don't you, if you're going to answer a question, I should at least get the courtesy of an answer.
I don't understand the question.
Okay, the question is this. At the point where I just played for you, when Wagner tears the spear, tears the ring off of Wotan's finger, Wotan tears the ring off of Alberic's finger. Thank you very much. It's a very violent moment, one that's supposed to really shock us.
Yeah.
And we hear the spear motive, clearly the spear motive going down, and then we hear the scale come back up. At the time, he's tearing it off his finger. So it's not too far-fetched to think that, and in many productions, he actually uses the spear to take the ring off of his finger. I think that's quite common. Since the spear is a symbol of authority, but it's also a weapon, potentially. So he uses it as a weapon. In this place, uniquely, in all of Rheingold, in one of the only places in the ring, where it goes up. It goes up at a time when something really terrible is being done with it. So perhaps Wagner has created an association in our heads of that when the spear motive goes up instead of down, it's being used in a very bad way.
Oh, I see.
Okay, that's what I meant. I'm sorry I wasn't clear. Trying to say too much in too little time. That's what it really comes down to. There are so many forms of the spear motive, not forms, manifestations of this idea. But the most glorious and the most perhaps expressive is at the end of Valhalla, which of course is the climactic moment of the Valhalla, when Wotan and Brunhilde are reconciled, when he hugs her, and we hear it every time in the later operas when the sense of this moment of great reconciliation between Wotan and Brunhilde occurs. We first hear it in the minor. If I interrupt going down and go up instead, same note, right? I've just taken the note but up a higher octave. As if, for instance, if I'm singing and I have a very terrible small range, I can only sing a few notes. So I'm singing da 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 da. I can't sing that note, so I go dee da 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 dee da 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 dee. I keep going up because I run out of notes that I can't sing going down. Well, he does that. Okay, then he puts it in the major. And what has been an authoritarian and very sort of stern motive has become one of the great, sublime, glorious love motives. We hear that as a love motive in the ring. So this is an example of motivic transformation. But it's still very much, whatever that motive is, I don't know what the name is, it's a motive which is very much in the family. It's a cousin, if not a brother, of the spear motive. Okay, now I'm on D. Magic. That's another big family. This is going to consist entirely of words that you don't know what they mean. Successions of median progressions. Chords moving a third up or down. Okay, here's a chord. The most normal thing for it to do is to go, which is a fifth away, or to go, which is dealing with 4 and 5 away from that. That's what sounds the most natural to us. What if it goes instead, or, those are all different ways to move a third away from it, either up or down. And in the ring, motives which are defined by that, which that has their chief characteristic, are all related to magic. The first one we hear is actually the upper part is just descriptive. That, of course, is loga. If we just change the chords a little bit, we have if we, instead of going back and forth, but keep going, where the chords keep moving in that same distance away, we get, here's a change, okay, that changed it. This goes back to it. That's the magic sleep, we call usually. When we hear it the first time when Wotan puts Brunhilde to sleep. We first hear it when he says he's going to put her to sleep, and then we hear it complete in a beautiful place. We hear it also, for instance, at many climactic moments in the ring. At the very end of Götterdämmerung, this huge climax before the Rhine overflows completely the stage, we hear. So it's obviously not really a motive of just magic sleep, because magic sleep has nothing to do with there. But it's some kind of something. Anyway, it's in that same family. So is, for instance, this. Which is the magic potion in Götterdämmerung, which grows right out of it. Actually, the first time we hear it, it goes. There's no reason in the world for them to have the Tarnhelm there. The Tarnhelm has nothing to do with the action. But Wagner is making us hear the resemblance. It's a very kind of interesting. In Götterdämmerung, Wagner has gotten very far away from his theories, where the motives and the music have to line up in any kind of one-to-one way. And Rheingold still, pretty much every time we hear a motive, it directly relates to something which is mentioned or seen or at least conjured up in some way, very, very physically. By the time we get to Götterdämmerung, things are much, much more symbolic, much more. He plays very loose with his own rules, much more metaphoric in the use, is probably a better word. The motives sort of stand for things stand for whole bodies of things rather than specific things. But anyway, this is a very interesting family. The most interesting use of it, which I think probably not too many of you have thought of, is recognize this? What is this? Brunhilde waking up. And also the beginning of Götterdämmerung, of course, begins with the same chords except different key. This is, and then the next chord is very, very slow. It's exactly the same as the Tarnhelm. Same chord progression, except it's just enormously slowed down, and then he has all this beautiful sound effects. So again, there's some kind of the Tarnhelm is one kind of transformation. Brunhilde's waking up is perhaps another kind of transformation. Yeah?
What's that first chord you played?
Just a minor chord.
It's had dissonance.
No.
Not that minor chord, it's a different chord.
No minor chord has a dissonance in it, but in itself.
No, I didn't say minor.
You mean, like in that one?
And you played a high chord. Yeah.
No, that's just because the piano's out of tune. That's because the piano's out of tune. No, that's a good question and a simple answer. It is dissonant. It is dissonant. Yes?
You haven't mentioned it musically, but can you play us the theme of Erica's music when she tells him?
I did mention.
Okay, when she tells him all things that are ends.
Oh, okay, that's right. Sure, that's another nature motive. It goes down. It's very interesting. That would be the most natural thing in the world if you're having, but he never does it. He doesn't do it in the whole ring. He goes up only, never goes down. So when we finally do hear this in the minor form going down, that one time there, and there's the tam plays a very strange sonority in the orchestra. It's very impressive. It makes a big. It's the same music. We call that the fall of the gods because that's what she's talking about. She says it. The gods will. She says, "Ein düster Tag dämmert den Göttern." A dark day is dawning for the gods. Yeah, I mean, but doesn't it become a little reductive to say every time it goes up in the major, it's the Rhine. Every time it goes up in the minor, it's Erda. And every time it goes down, major or minor, never goes down in the minor, only in the major. It's the fall of the gods. Yeah, they're all basically the same. I mean, it's just they're different spins on it, and they take on different associations for us. But that's a very good one. I should have mentioned it. Thank you. Okay. Let's go now to E, which is the subject of my dissertation. Literally, this is what I did my dissertation at Juilliard on, this 4-note cell. That's a cell which we hear most definitively as this love motive in the first act of Die Walküre, which we've already heard many times in Rheingold. We've heard it, of course, as the Descent in Nibelheim. We hear it over and over again. We hear it as the part 2 of Freies 2. key. Repeat it over and over again. Fry is running away. And that's why it became misnamed as flight. Because they took that and then they said, oh, they're flying, they're fleeing, they're running. Instead of thinking, the association, however, is not with running, it's with Freya as the goddess of love. A very convenient but highly oversimplified statement would be that, you still there? This is answering your question. That if we listen to this theme, that part would be maybe just Freya as natural manifestation, as nature. And going down would be more physical love. Freya as physical love. One is Freya as part of nature, one is as Freya as physical love, which is also part of nature, of course, in Wagner's world. So that would be a very convenient, but kind of reductive way of defining the two. But that four-note cell throughout the ring is one of the basic, it spawns all that music, which we associate, of course, with Siegmund and Sieglinde. But it also spawns, this is going to be a little harder for you to hear, rhythms. You can hear that? Everybody hears that? Key, and it overlaps rather than starts each time. Anybody know where this is from? Fricka, that's right, Fricka singing to Wotan. It puts Fricka's relationship to Wotan in a very interesting light. When, by the way, no commentator I'm aware of has ever pointed that out. Another one, Wotan and Erda. Wotan and Erda, when he goes down to see Erda in Act 3 of Siegfried, we have... theme of the whole scene, but that's the same four-note love cell. So also casts the nature of the relationship between Wotan and Erda in an interesting light. Of course, we should know better about that one, since Wotan himself tells Brunhilde that with Liebeszauber, with the magic of love, he was able to tame Erda and get all this information out of her. So clearly Wotan and Erda have been, she didn't just bear Brunhilde form, they were lovers. They were clearly in love. Or at least she was clearly, I don't know, she was clearly in love with him, I guess you could say. There are lots of other. The use of this four-note cell is quite complex, and it's my bailiwick, as it were. But it's not so much a motive family as it's a motivic element in the ring, which manifests itself in many different ways. Do I have any time at all? If I don't, I'm going to stop.
5 minutes.
Why don't we go over 10 minutes? Start lunch and Simon's lecture 10 minutes late.
No.
And take it out of the break. 2:30 break, and just reduce that to 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. I'll deal with this. I'll deal with this very, very quickly. Which is the first thing I'm going to deal with the others first. G. Obviously, not all the music in the ring fits into these convenient families. Of course not. For instance, there's some music in the ring which clearly sounds like it doesn't belong in the ring, like. Winterstürme, or to some extent this, although this may be a little bit less. Or certain very important motifs like this certainly sound like it belongs to the ring, which we've all learned to call the fate motive, although I have no idea why. In any case, it doesn't fall into any of these categories. Some people have tried to make them, but they don't. Yeah.
Brunhilde's redemption.
Which one is that?
One of the families.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to get to that in just a second. Absolutely. Totally. I'm going to ask now, no more questions, just because we have so little time. So we can do questions after the performance tonight. Then you can grill me all you want, and I hope you will. Ask me, I'll play anything you want me to play and discuss anything you want me to discuss. So I just want melodic lines featuring a leap. This is just a melody that has as its main characteristic some leap in it. For instance, a sixth. Melodies like. So we have, the beautiful. Or this melody has another leap too, but for that second. As it happens, also Right, interesting. Also, up to there, nothing much has happened, but what really gives it its whole character is that sixth. Now, there is something these all have in common, but I just do not get it. I mean, I think thematically, I think they all have in common the concept of heroism as it happens, but that takes us too far afield. What about a falling fifth? That's a very big idea in the ring. Derek Cook talks a lot about that. First time we hear that idea is when Wotan has just had his great idea, great thought. That's a fifth. The idea is. So, for instance, in that whole big scene with Fricka, we hear all the time. We also hear. Or we hear that's the horn call that we'll call the wedding. It's the wedding music of the Gibichungs, of Gunther and Brunhilde and Gutrune and Siegfried. It happens to be also kind of the reverse of talking about inversions. And he plays on it. He'll go. He does them simultaneously. And it's kind of interesting. Siegfried's horn call is the reverse of this other. According to Derek Cook, in all of Wagner's music, that motivic little idea has to do with negative forces, antagonistic forces. In a way, Fricka, seen in this case as an antagonistic force, or the Gibichungs. I mean, this is very sweet and pretty, but Gutrune is being used to take Siegfried away from Brunhilde and to get her caught up into Hagen's plot. So there perhaps is something in this. I'm not as interested in trying to say what this means, it's just that it's there. It's a feature of there's other music in the ring that's based on this feature. The falling octave. We always associate that in some way with the sword. We hear the and Gunnar Damring's very sort of sinister combination of things, because that was, in the Middle Ages, they called that the interval of the devil. And it was avoided like the plague. Because it's very ambiguous and unpleasant. And so, taking something which is very, very unambiguous, like the sword, and treating it with that, and all through Gunnar Damring in particular, we hear things that have these falling octaves. And they're usually, in some way in our mind, related to the sword, which has as its main feature this falling octave. So, by the way, this means that things can be more than one thing. I said before that the sword is part of the nature family. It is. It's just a chord, but it also has that feature of the octave. And then I just wanted to touch a moment on falling seventh because of the question here about Brunhilde's redemption. Seventh is this interval. It's a very sort of, or even, it's a very tense and difficult to sing, actually, interval. It's far apart. We don't have a lot of music in the ring that features that. We have this, for instance.
What is that?
What is that? That's good. It's the first time we hear it is Fricka. Actually, Wotan saying to Fricka, that I actually love you more than you think I do. And it's associated very much with Fricka and all through Fricka and her attraction to Wotan. Wotan's attraction to Fricka. Fricka, we hear it, for instance, very prominently when Loga tells Fricka that if she has the ring, she says, and then Loga confirms it, if she has the ring, she'll be so beautiful that Wotan will never want to leave her again. So we hear again the same. And we hear this falling seventh as a feature of this too. It's the sixth going up and down. It's part of the end of it. We also, twice, in very important places in the ring, hear it attached to Siegfried's motive. It usually goes like that. But in two very crucial places, one in the funeral march. And none of this would be significant except for what it allows Wagner to do technically. Because there is another very important motive that features a falling seventh, which is... let's play the more convenient place. That's the motive that Schuder's referring to. But it's basically just a slightly dressed up version of, which by the way we hear very prominently when Siegfried first arrives on top of the mountain and he first sees Brunhilde. He doesn't know it's Brunhilde, of course. We hear also. That same music. Obviously this is not music that's just about Fricka. It's not anymore. It's clearly not just about Fricka. In any case, it becomes, we hear it that one time when Sieglinde praises Brunhilde for having saved her life and Siegfried's life. And Wagner actually does call this motive by name. In a letter, which was published about 16 years ago, he calls it In Praise of Brunhilde. So no redemption through love like we all learned as kids, but it's in praise of Brunhilde. But it's in praise of Brunhilde as a symbol of something which has to do with perhaps the eternal feminine or women or something about it, because it's associated with Fricka too. It's, by the way, I always think from an autobiographical standpoint, Wagner had a very bad relationship with his first wife, Minna, and famously put all the shrewish aspects and jealous aspects of Fricka onto Fricka. He put the character of his wife, Minna. And yet, the final great redemptive theme in The Ring is a theme which is basically identified with Fricka, or it's very slightly varied. So maybe he actually recognizes a far greater significance to his first wife, Minna, in The Ring than one would at first blush think he had. But I think he recognized deep down just how emblematic of the importance